Good evening, everyone. I would like to welcome you to our webinar entitled State of California Requirements, California Department of Tax and Fee Administration, hosted by the City of Los Angeles's Department of Cannabis Regulation. My name is Frank Louie with the California Asian Pacific Chamber of Commerce, and I'll be your moderator for tonight's event. Before we get started, let's take a moment to review some housekeeping rules. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and can be viewed after the editing process on DCR's website. You will be muted with cameras off for the duration of the webinar. This means that your camera and audio function will not be available to you during this session. However, you will be able to see and hear all the panelists. There's an open chat box at the bottom of your Zoom screen where you can interact with one another for networking or comment on the information. Please use caution when sharing personal information in a public forum and keep your questions focused on topics for tonight's topic. Please ask questions. We encourage you to submit questions in the Q&A box below. We're gathering and responding to your questions throughout the presentation, and we'll have a Q&A session where you will also get responses in the last 15 minutes of tonight's event. You are encouraged to utilize the Q&A box at the bottom pane of your Zoom screen. If you use the Q&A box for questions, everyone will be able to see the questions and answers as they are provided. Finally, please note that the content presented tonight was not created by the California Department of Cannabis Regulation or the City of Los Angeles and is for informational purposes only. This information is subject to change and does not replace or supersede the Los Angeles Municipal Code nor constitute legal advice. If you have any specific questions outside of tonight's topic, please call 213-978-0738 during business hours to speak to a DCR representative. Now let's transition to the presentation. I'd like to introduce our speaker from the California Department of Tax and Fee Administration, also known as Cdtfa, Nick Maduros. Nick Maduros serves as the first director of the California Department of Tax and Fee Administration. Appointed by Governor Brown and reappointed by Governor Newsom, he leads one of the nation's largest revenue agencies. Together with a team of more than 4,000, he administers 39 tax and fee programs that generate more than $92 billion annually for the state of California, its cities, and counties. Prior to his appointment at Cdtfa, Maduros served in the Obama administration as Chief of Staff of the U.S. Small Business Administration. At the SBA, he managed a team of 3,000 employees in 70 offices. Earlier in his career, Maduros worked as an attorney and founded 2 successful public affairs firms in Washington, D.C. Mr. Maduros is a graduate of Yale College and Harvard Law School. A native of Stockton, California, he now lives in Davis with his wife and 3 young daughters. I would now like to turn over the virtual mic to Nick. Welcome, Nick, and thank you for your participation.
Hey,
and
thanks
please share your slides.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, Frank, and it's nice to be here with you all tonight. Let me go ahead and try and share my screen here if I can. Bear with me. Goes quite as seamlessly as one would hope. Give me 1 minute. It was just here now. All right. Go. All right, is that working? Can you see that?
That looks good.
All right. Well, listen, thank you everybody again for joining us tonight. As Frank said, my name is Nick Maduros. I'm the director of the California Department of Tax and Fee Administration. I've got as Frank said, we administer 39 different tax and fee programs for the state of California. Among those, and the ones that are most relevant for today's presentation, are the cannabis excise tax and the sales and use tax, both of which are, as of January 1st, the responsibility of cannabis retailers in the state of California. Just to give you a brief overview of what we'll be talking about, a little bit about Cdtfa, description of the cannabis tax laws here in the state, and talk about the sales tax. We'll look at some of the paperwork needed, resale certificates, issues around taxation of medicinal cannabis, and trade samples. We'll get into some of the requirements for the various players in the cannabis industry: cultivators, manufacturers, distributors, and retailers. And also, I'll talk a bit about equity operators, and then I'll give some practical information about getting a permit, what kind of records we would expect people to keep, and what sort of penalties and enforcement look like in the tax front around cannabis and around sales and use tax. So anyway, that's sort of the run of my discussion tonight, and then I'd be happy to answer questions that come in over the course of this as well. So Cdtfa, as I mentioned, we administer 39 different tax and fee programs. Last year, we were actually up about $94 billion. We'll probably be up near $100 billion later this year. We've got offices around the state of California. If you need help in person, we do have offices in Glendale and Cerritos. That's probably at West Covina. Those are closest there to the city of Los Angeles at the moment. We had a Culver City office that's being relocated at the moment. We also have offices in New York City, Chicago, and Houston, where we have teams of auditors that audit large out-of-state retailers who sell into California and are responsible for tax. So as you all know, Prop 64 back in 2016 legalized adult use cannabis in the state of California as of January 1st, 2018. And it set up a tax system as well as a regulatory system, which at the state level is primarily the responsibility of the Department of Cannabis Control, and then Cdtfa administers the taxes. There are a number of cannabis business activities that I'll be talking about tonight. So just so we're all on the same page, we'll be talking, I'll be mentioning cultivators, who are those folks who grow the cannabis, manufacturers who take that natural product and create other cannabis products from that, distributors who play a central role in cannabis industry in the state of California. Although, as I'll discuss in a moment, the tax system shifted as of January 1, and in a way that I think will make everyone's life much easier in the state of California, but it did impact distributors and retailers in particular. And then lastly, we'll be talking about retailers, and primarily my remarks will focus on retailers, both because they're under our purview and because my understanding is that most of the folks on this call or watching this webcast are interested primarily in the retail sector. So prior to January 1 of this year, well, actually going back a bit farther, up until the first half of last year, there were three taxes that applied to cannabis. There was a cultivation tax, which was a weight-based tax based on for cannabis growers. There was the excise tax, and then there was, of course, the sales and use tax, which applies not just to cannabis, but to all tangible personal property sold in the state of California. The system was incredibly complicated, with distributors responsible for remitting or paying to the state the excise tax and the cultivation tax, though the excise tax was collected from a consumer and given to a retailer who gave it to a distributor, and the cultivation tax was paid by the cultivator to the distributor. The system was overly cumbersome and very difficult to enforce. And so last year, the California state legislature, and the governor in Assembly Bill 195 changed the tax system around cannabis. AB 195, Assembly Bill 195 did a number of things. First, it discontinued the cultivation tax effective July 1 of last year. Although at some point in the future, if state revenues from the excise tax do not keep pace with their historical trends, then the excise tax will increase in order to make up revenue lost from the cultivation tax. But that's still a couple of years off. Effective January 1, 2023, the excise tax responsibility moved from the distributor to the retailer. And the legislation also included significant tax enforcement provisions to help encourage illicit operators to enter the legal market, and to help us, frankly, drive illicit operators out of the market so that legal operators have a more level playing field. The bill also included significant equity operator provisions, including license fee waivers at the state level and vendor compensation through the retention of tax revenue, which I will discuss a bit later. So the current tax system is much simpler. It involves the consumer basically paying the excise tax, which is 15% of the gross receipts of the cannabis sales, and then the sales tax, which varies depending on where you are in the state. There's a 7.25% statewide rate on the sales and use tax, and then local jurisdictions can add on to that. So you have in Los Angeles County, I think the highest there, it goes up to 10.25%, I believe, in some locations, between various county and city taxes that have been added on by voter initiative and approved at the ballot. So anyway, here we are in a little bit more detail. Starting this past January, there's a 15% cannabis excise tax on gross receipts from the retail sale of cannabis or cannabis products. So this applies to the sale of all cannabis products. If you're selling a t-shirt or something like that, the sales tax would still apply, but not the cannabis excise tax. Gross receipts is a term of art in state taxation. It includes the sales price of the cannabis after discounts, plus all charges related to the sale, such as delivery fees and any local cannabis business tax listed separately on the receipt to the purchaser. The reporting and paying of the cannabis excise tax to Cdtfa as of January 1, as I mentioned, shifted from the distributor to the cannabis retailer. Cannabis retailers must now, in addition to a seller's permit, which we'll get to, must also get an excise tax permit and then file quarterly with the excise tax. So the first cannabis retailer excise tax return will be due on May 1st, 2023. It's typically due the last day of April, but that's on a weekend this year, so we're into May. That would cover sales from January, February, and March of 2023. So as I mentioned earlier, sales tax also applies to sales of cannabis and cannabis products, as well as to all other sales of tangible personal property in the state of California or into the state of California. So you generally, if you're running a retail dispensary, I would think virtually all of your sales would be subject to the sales tax unless something is specifically excluded or exempt. Sales tax, again, is based on gross receipts. The excise tax is included in the gross receipts subject to sales tax. So the excise tax is first, and then the sales tax is the final tax. As you can see there, sales tax rates vary around the state from 7.25% up to 10.75% in some jurisdictions. This last point is an important one. The sales tax, retailers can choose or choose not to get reimbursed for the sales tax by their customers, as all of us know, because we go out and buy things and see the sales tax listed. Overwhelmingly, retailers choose to pass along the sales tax to their customers. Whether or not they collect the sales tax from their customers, it is the responsibility of the retailer to remit to the state the sales tax due on all of their sales. Corollary to that, the excise tax, it is mandatory that cannabis retailers collect the cannabis excise tax from the purchasers at the 15% rate. So it's optional to get reimbursement from the consumer on the sales tax, but mandatory on the cannabis excise tax. If you're interested in finding out the applicable sales and use tax rate, if you go to cdtfa.ca.gov, you can look up sales tax rates there on our webpage. If you go to the homepage, you can click on See Tax Rates. It's the button in the tax and fee rates box near the middle of the screen. You see a little arrow there. The screen above provides you with different options for locating sales tax rates. You can also look up, one option is to look it up by the address of your retail location. Now, it gets a little bit more complicated if you are delivering cannabis, because the district tax, the portion above 7.25, is taxed based on where the product is delivered. So there's a bit here of an excise tax and sales tax example. So you can see how the various taxes interplay. I know this is complicated. I know we get a lot of complaints about taxes based on other taxes. We are just administering the law as it is written. So here in this example, there is a selling price of cannabis of $35. Say there is a 10% cannabis business tax, which adds $3.50, and perhaps a delivery fee in this example of $5. So you have a subtotal of $43.50. The excise tax then is applied on that full amount. So 15% of $43.50 is $6.53, leaving you with a subtotal of $50.03. You apply the sales tax. In this example, it's 8.75%, and you get $4.38. And the total due from the customer is $54.41. And you can see $40 of that is the cannabis and the delivery fee. And then the additional $14.41 is the local cannabis business tax, the excise tax, and the sales tax. So if you are selling cannabis to others who are going to make a sale for resale, so this allows retailers, this is a resale certificate. It allows you to buy resale inventory without paying the sales tax. This is if you're buying cannabis at wholesale. Sorry about that. So if you're a retailer and you go out to buy cannabis without a resale certificate, without providing the person from whom you're buying product a resale certificate, they would be responsible for paying sales tax on that sale, which, because it's a wholesale sale, would not, you don't need to pay sales tax, but you do need to if you don't have a resale certificate. So this is very important if you're going to be buying at wholesale and selling at retail, because the resale certificate is what allows you to do that without paying the sales and use tax. So you must provide a timely completed resale certificate to your supplier. They should keep it on hand. If you are selling it wholesale, you must keep the resale certificates on hand. We have a certificate that you can use on our website. It's Cdtfa Form 230, the general resale certificate. And you must, whoever is selling at wholesale needs to keep the resale certificate on hand. And it's very important that if you use a resale certificate, that you not use any items purchased tax-free in a taxable manner. So you can't personally use them, and you cannot, I guess that'd be the main misuse. But you know, at that point, the next transfer is going to be a taxable transfer if they're sold. All right. Now, as I'm sure all of you know, there are also there's medicinal cannabis, and Prop 64 allowed for at least no sales tax on the sales of medicinal cannabis. But unlike the era before Prop 64, where many people just had prescriptions or notes from their doctor, currently, in order to have a sale exempt from the sales tax, you must have a valid medical marijuana identification card. The customer must have a valid medical marijuana identification card issued by the California Department of Public Health, as well as a valid government ID card. And again, this does not apply to the excise tax. The excise tax is due even on sales of medicinal cannabis. It applies only to the sales tax. The California Department of Public Health has a website that allows you to verify the validity of a medical marijuana identification card. You can see the address there. And there are specific record-keeping requirements if you are going to make exempt medicinal sales. If you make these qualifying exempt sales and claim the deduction on your sales and use tax return, you should maintain the following records for each transaction: the 9-digit ID number and expiration date on the medical marijuana identification card, and the related sales invoice or other original record of sale. So please keep those records, and we'll discuss in a bit more why it's so important that your records are in good order. Now, that's for medicinal cannabis sales. For donated medicinal cannabis, it's a different story. The legislature changed the rules around donated medicinal cannabis. And so beginning March 1st of 2020, cannabis retailers may provide free medicinal cannabis or medicinal cannabis products to medicinal cannabis patients or their primary caregivers. They may donate medicinal cannabis to cannabis retailers for subsequent donation to medicinal cannabis patients without payment of use tax or excise tax. So this is one area where the tax does not apply if the product is donated to medicinal cannabis patients. For trade samples, certain cannabis licensees may provide and receive cannabis trade samples. Cultivators, manufacturers, and distributors can provide trade samples. Cannabis retailers can receive cannabis trade samples. So cannabis retailers cannot provide the trade samples. They can receive them from distributors who are trying to broaden their customer base. The cannabis excise tax does not apply to cannabis trade samples. But if the cannabis trade samples are given for free, and if there are documents, if the receipt and transfer of the trade samples is adequately documented. So requirements for cannabis cultivators, manufacturers, and distributors. Basically, everyone involved in the cannabis industry in the state of California requires a seller's permit. which you can get for free from Cdtfa. That is basically a sales and use tax permit. Even if you're selling at wholesales, that's why cultivators are involved. If they're selling a product that would normally be taxable, but if they're selling it at wholesale, so there's no tax, they still require a seller's permit. Your manufacturers are selling a product, they require a seller's permit. Distributors and retailers as well. There are also, as I'm sure all of you know, required licenses issued by the Department of Cannabis Control, and then there are permits and licenses issued by local jurisdictions. So specifically for cannabis retailers, as I just mentioned, the seller's permit is required. And as of January 1, all cannabis retailers also are required to have a cannabis retailer excise tax account with Cdtfa. For those retailers that were in business in 2022 and had seller's permits, and we had identified those businesses as cannabis retail businesses, we should have and tried to switch automatically enroll all of those retailers with an excise tax account. If you happen to be in that boat and were not automatically enrolled with an excise tax account, it's important that you get one, because the taxes are due, as I said, May 1st for the first time. And we're now 2.5 months into the year, and you should have been collecting that 15% excise tax for all of those sales. If you're going into business now, you can get the seller's permit and the cannabis retailer excise tax account by either going to our website, cdtfa.ca.gov, calling our 800 number and getting assistance there, or going into one of our local district offices. You would also need, again, the license issued by the Department of Cannabis Control, and then any applicable local permits or licenses that are required. Now, just a bit about the equity operator provisions. I mentioned earlier that the Cannabis Tax Reform Bill, AB 195 last year, included some equity operator provisions. And I wanted to highlight from the beginning of this year through the end of 2025. The online application is available through Cdtfa's online portal. You need to make sure you get approved before you hold on to any of the excise tax. And once you are approved, the retailer's online excise tax account will automatically reduce the cannabis excise tax amount due. Now, to qualify for this equity operator provision, I believe the maximum annual sales, I think, is 5 million in sales, and it only applies to one location. But still, if you take the 5 million and apply it to, I believe it's 5 million, and apply it to 15% of that, and then keeping 20% of that, it's a substantial amount of vendor compensation available. The other equity benefit provided in AB 195 is a cannabis license fee waiver. Now, all of our licenses or permits at Cdtfa are free. As I like to say, everyone's a winner at Cdtfa, but as you probably know, the Department of Cannabis Control does have license fees, and equity operators are eligible for a waiver, and it's available to business owners who've been negatively impacted by the criminalization of cannabis. You have to meet certain requirements to qualify. You see here, annual gross revenue, $5 million or less, at least 50% ownership by a person meeting one of the equity criteria, And that's all laid out on the Department of Cannabis Control's website, which is cannabis.ca.gov. So if you need to get a permit from Cdtfa, you can go to our website here. I'll just walk you through a little bit. You can register right there online. You click register, what's online registration, get started. Then you can go there to register a new business activity. And you can see there, you get the seller's permit if you're selling items or goods in California. And then you select yes for cannabis or cannabis products and no to the other questions here. And then you click the next button and you will be on your way. Now, a bit about record keeping. As I mentioned earlier, this is I can't stress enough how important this is. You are required by law to keep business records so that we can verify the accuracy of your returns and determine how much tax is due. Maintaining good books and records will help you track your sales and purchases and assist when preparing your tax returns, but it will, which is essential, but it will also be essential if you are ever subject to audit. So we at Cdtfa have almost 1,000 auditors, and we regularly audit businesses that are within our purview. And when we do, some examples of the records you must keep include sales invoices, cash register tapes, sales journals, resale certificates, shipping documents, purchase invoices, bank records, purchase orders, purchase journals, and your tax returns. Records must be kept for at least 4 years unless otherwise directed by Cdtfa. Now, if you don't have sufficient records, our auditors will do their best to estimate the sales that you have made that are subject to tax and come up with a tax liability. And if we have to do that estimating because you do not have the records that you're supposed to have, the burden then shifts to you as a taxpayer to show that that our auditors' estimated tax liability is unreasonable. And that's a very difficult burden for a lot of businesses to meet, which is why it's so important that you keep good records. Now, if you're using a point of sale system, it should have, if programmed correctly and used correctly, it should keep a lot of records for you and hopefully make your life a bit easier. But again, it's very important. It's I know a lot of people, I don't know what the Venn diagram of overlap between people who are really into accounting and people who are really into opening cannabis businesses is, but I doubt there's a ton of overlap. But it's important that you all get at least somewhat into accounting. And the fact that you're spending it Thursday evening during March Madness watching a presentation on taxes is some indication that maybe you're on the right track. Now the department, so that I was just discussing the Cdtfa record keeping requirements. The Department of Cannabis Control requires licensees to keep accurate records of commercial cannabis activity for 7 years. So we require you to keep it for 4 years, and they require 7. And then California Cannabis Track and Trace is again another tool that the state uses to follow cannabis all the way from the cultivator through final retail sale. Distributors are required to use a wholesale manifest to transfer in the track and trace. The distributor is required to record the retailer's wholesale cost of each package in that transfer. And then the retailers are required to record their wholesale cost and the retail selling price when the items are sold. Now here's another can be unpleasant topic, which are penalties. The penalties in cannabis tax law are more severe than in many other of the tax and fee programs that we administer. There is a 50% penalty for the late payment of cannabis taxes. That is a mandatory penalty for failure to pay the cannabis taxes when due. So it is incredibly important. The cannabis taxes, I know from talking to others, and when you see the compounding of the tax there, people say the tax is very high. It gets even higher through penalties if the taxes are not paid on time. So we do have the ability to relieve penalty if we find that your failure to timely pay was due to reasonable cause and circumstances beyond your control. But that is also a relatively high bar to meet. If you think that you are going to have trouble meeting your tax obligation on time, I would encourage you to reach out to Cdtfa as soon as you know that you may have some difficulty. And our team will try to do what we can to assist. You can also request relief of penalty online, but if you're requesting relief, I would really encourage you also to call and talk to somebody. So a bit about inspections. So Cdtfa has inspectors all over the state of California whose job it is day in and day out to go in. It's their job day in and day out to go into dispensaries and also to tobacco retailers and make sure that all of the product is being taxed properly, that records are being kept properly, and that everything basically is being done legally at those locations. So they conduct regular inspections to make sure that everybody's complying with the cannabis tax laws. During an inspection, Cdtfa makes sure, again, you have all the correct permits and the licenses, you understand your tax responsibilities, and you're following the laws properly. If they show up, they will have identification, they will identify themselves, and then they will request access, which you must give them. They will verify purchase invoices and sales receipts, have the required information, and show that the proper cannabis taxes were paid or collected. They'll make sure the cannabis products are packaged as required by law. And they may also use track and trace system for the track and trace system for additional verification to make sure that all of the product there is supposed to be there, that no product is there that's not supposed to be there, that all of your sales are showing up on track and trace. If there is any product that is not supposed to be there, or any unlicensed or illicit cannabis there, they have the authority to seize any of that, or if there is no evidence of tax payment, or if they are not secured in the proper packaging. All of those items can be seized. So AB 195, as I mentioned earlier, also included a number of tax enforcement provisions to help us, again, in particular with the illicit market, to try to get at those folks who are willfully non-complying with California's tax laws. So unlicensed persons found in possession of cannabis or cannabis products, if they are found in possession, immediately the excise tax becomes due on the full value of those products as if they were sold at retail. So if we find an unlicensed dispensary, all of the product in there, we will take the full value and we will assess the operator of that dispensary 15% of that full value as the excise tax, and it becomes immediately due and payable. for licensed persons. So even if you have a license and you're operating a legal business, but you have product that has not been entered or entered accurately in track and trace, again, in the same way, the excise tax becomes immediately due on the full value as if you are the purchaser at retail. The bill also included a provision to hold corporate officers and other responsible people personally liable for unpaid cannabis taxes. This is one of the tools that is common. It's used in sales and use tax. Even every business selling tangible personal property operates this way in the state of California. On the sales tax side, so just setting up an LLC is not enough to protect your personal assets if you are intentionally not remitting the tax. There are certain hurdles our team has to meet, but we will do our best to go after and get the tax from individuals if for some reason the corporate entity, if people are trying to sort of churn a corporate identity and open and close in order to avoid tax liability. That is not a great defense in the state of California. And then the AB 195 also established a multi-agency task force, of which Cdtfa is a part, along with a range of other state and local departments across the state to try to get at the illegal market in California, both on the grow side, the distribution side, and the retail side. If you have more questions, we have put out a tax guide for cannabis businesses. You can see it there on our homepage. If you go to tax resources and then go to industry guides, there is the tax guide for cannabis businesses. Just to show you how to navigate it, this is what it looks like. It's got a number of tabs with information for various folks, for distributors, retailers, cultivators, manufacturers. Then it's got some tax facts, which are things we've put out since adult use cannabis became legal to try to inform people as questions arise, and links to other resources. You can also sign up for updates from Cdtfa that will keep you informed as new developments occur. And then there are some additional online resources, including publication 557. That's when you know you're dealing with a government tax agency, when we have things called Pub 557, tax help for the cannabis industry. We also have a video tax help for cannabis retailers that you are free to watch. Again, if you have any questions regarding any of these tax responsibilities, you can call our customer service center, which is open from 7:30 to 5, Monday through Friday. There's the phone number. You can call our taxpayer rights advocate office. We have a whole office that exists just to help people who are having trouble either navigating the tax system or who find themselves with some liability and are trying to figure out why, or to find some relief if they think it's been wrongly assessed. You can go to our website, or there again, the Cannabis Industry Guide. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions that folks may have. Let me try and stop sharing my screen if I can.
Great, thank you, Nick. I think I'm back on the mic. Yep. Thank you, Nick. Always, great information as always. So much to digest and internalize, but thank you very much. For that, we'll move to some audience questions. I have a couple of things. First of all, great math example. That just kind of breaking out the math example helps clarify the tax, how tax is calculated. I know that when you hear it, it's hard to visualize, but when you show it on the slide in the simple way, I think it makes a lot more sense, whether you like it or not. It certainly spells it out. I think that's key. I also thought it was pretty interesting about the some of the enforcement emphasis and the maybe new tools or resources that are available to you in the state to try to battle in those challenging areas. Just one clarification that I thought was a really important point, but I want to just maybe have you just highlight it.
Sure.
On the AB 95, the equity operator provision on the vendor compensation. Can you just summarize that again? Because I just want to make sure people understood that what the retailers out there are available to them is available.
So if you qualify for the equity operator license fee waiver from DCC, so you have to meet those criteria, which they're responsible for administering and deciding who qualifies. If you do meet that for one location, this can't be for a multi-location business, but for one location. So to meet it, you have to, the cap is $5 million in sales, but say $5 million in sales, 15% of that is what, $750,000, I think. And then so up to $750,000, and if you sold $5 million in cannabis product, you'd have, I guess, is that right? Is my math right? $750,000 in excise tax.
Mm-hmm.
You would be able to keep 20% of that.
Mm-hmm.
So you'd be able to keep, what's that, $150,000 a year in tax that you would otherwise give into the state, up to, it's 20% of whatever your excise tax liability is.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's exactly how I interpreted it, and I love that example as well. So I mean, it was a nice revised legislation, right, to help the retailers in the social equity community, right? Let's move to a couple questions.
Sure.
I mean, I'm not going to pronounce this right, but Svyatoslav had submitted a question. You may have answered it. It's just, I mean, they were looking for resources, like seeing like tax flow or workflow for collecting taxes for the business operators. I assume that if you go to your website and the resource pages you mentioned, there's going to be all kinds of tools and workflows and checklists.
Yes, like that, and there are videos
to
show you how to fill out a return and lots of tools there. So I would encourage people to go to the website. Again, if you have questions after that, you can call us, or you can go to one of our offices and get help in person, or you can call and I bet we'd even send folks out to your business and help you make sure you're doing things right. I mean, the last thing we want to do is to have people make mistakes. We have some people who don't comply because they're willfully non-complying, and we have some people who don't comply because let's face it, taxes are complicated. All of us know that just from filing our income tax returns. It's not easy, and unfortunately we have a lot of people who make mistakes and the taxes are still due, and those are really the tragic instances. So we want to help people do things correctly, help people who want to do things correctly. We want to help them get it right. No,
I appreciate that that encouragement, because not everyone wants to pick up the phone and call Cdtfa. So but to know that there's someone that's kind of guide and advise you to stay out of trouble is valuable. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, for us, I mean, I will say, I mean, this is just another tax program that we administer. We the cannabis businesses are just like the other million businesses from whom we collect tax. And so I would encourage people to not be shy.
I don't know if you're able to answer this one, but let's give it a shot. It sounds like it's a scenario question. So Gloria had asked the question: in January of 2023, a new requirement was rolled out by Cdtfa the requirement is that the excise tax can no longer be baked into the price, but must rather be itemized on the receipt. If you did not implement that change, but did so in March, will we have to pay an additional tax on that excise tax if we did not itemize it?
I don't know that that was new, because I think even under the old tax system, the cannabis excise tax always had to be itemized. I don't know I mean, the cannabis excise tax is going to be due on all of those sales.
Yeah.
And if it was not itemized, I don't know. I'd encourage, I mean, either I can have my team, if your team can take a note and get it back to me, I'm happy to share it with you, and you can get it back to Gloria. I'm not sure how we deal with that situation.
Yeah. Or could Gloria call the resource page?
She sure could, yeah.
I think
she can also reach out. I mean, my email is nick.maduros, MADUROS at cdtfa.ca.gov. I'm happy to, if somebody reaches out to me, I'm happy to get it to the right person and make sure we get you an answer. Yeah,
no, that's great. That's great. Let's look at some of these other questions that were submitted as well. What Cdtfa issued permits does a cannabis retailer require?
So you'll need the seller's permit, which is the sales and use tax permit, essentially, and then you'll need the retailer excise tax permit. So those are the two you need from us.
Right. Yeah, and then another question came in: do cultivators need a Cdtfa issued permit?
They do need a seller's permit because they're selling taxable property. Now they're selling it for resale, so they're not going to generally need to collect tax from the purchaser or remit tax to the state. But anybody who's selling, even if you're selling at wholesale, needs to have a seller's permit, and then they would need to get a resale certificate from who's ever purchasing from them in order to absolve themselves of the sales tax liability.
Okay, and then just clarify what are the other permits or licenses that you'll need?
So you'll need those two from us. You'll need the DCC permits, and then you'll need whatever local permits are required in whatever jurisdiction you're in.
Okay. And I think you answered this in your slides, but are there any fees to get a seller's permit or cannabis excise tax permit? Right?
No, we don't require any fees for our permits.
Right. I think you said everyone's a winner, right?
That's right.
Right. Another question: when do retailers need to apply for a cannabis excise tax permit?
Well, you need to have it before you start making any sales. So if you're already making sales, you should already have it. If you aren't yet making sales, it's not a long process for us, so it's not something you need to have months in advance. I don't know. The only caveat to that is, at least in the previous tax structure, and it may still be true, that DCC, in order to get the DCC permits, you needed to show that you had the required tax permits. So it may be that you need to have them even before you apply for the DCC permits.
Okay. Yeah, and that may have answered Lucia's question. For someone who recently received one of the lottery licensing opportunities and is embarking on the process, when's the right time to start the cannabis retail excise, account that report?
There's no harm in getting it. Just once you get the permits, so they're free and you don't need to, so there's no harm in getting it early. The only thing to know is, once you get it, even if you don't make any sales because you're not yet in business, you need to file a return every quarter. And you just, it's very simple because you're not making any sales. So it's just what we call a zero return. So you get total sales 0, your tax is going to be 0. But you do, once you pull a permit, you need to file. Okay,
yeah, that's great. So if someone's proactive and does it early, no harm, no foul. However, you do have to submit those requirements, even if it's zero, right?
Yeah, so every quarter you'd file your tax returns, and again, it's very simple. I don't want people to get scared off thinking I don't want to. You're better off just if you think you're going to get it and you're applying for your DCC permits, you might as well go ahead and pull your tax permits and just file quarterly zero returns.
Right. Yeah, makes sense. Okay, here's another one from Farrell. Does AB 195 waive tax fees for retailers along with cultivators?
Tax fees for retailers. Well, I mean, it actually moved the tax to the retailer. I mean, before there was a very complicated system where so this is what Prop 64 basically envisioned, was a 15% tax at retail. But when the legislature tried to implement Prop 64, they moved the incidence of the tax to the distributor. But obviously the distributor didn't know how much it was going to sell for at retail. So there was this whole system where there was a markup, an average statewide markup, and the tax was based on that. It got very complicated. So now it's 15% of the gross receipts, and then the sales taxes on top of that. And there's no waiver of that. There is, I mean, the only thing I can think of that the questioner might be asking about is the equity vendor compensation model that is available to certain qualified equity operators, where they would be able to retain some of the excise tax.
Okay. And then Lewis has a question. You may have heard this one before out there in the general atmosphere, right? What is going to be done on the tax on tax issue? Is that legal?
Well, I am not sure which tax on tax issue they're talking about. So there is, obviously the sales tax applies to the excise tax and applies to the city taxes. I believe there is some discussion going on because I think the city of Los Angeles and the state are having some discussions around the city of Los Angeles's tax, which we will figure that out. It gets confusing because everybody's using the term gross receipts, and it's really a term of art that's means something very specific in the state tax context, and local jurisdictions under state sales and use tax are not allowed to. They can have business license taxes. They can't have additional sales taxes that we don't administer at Cdtfa. So anyway, it's a long way of saying, if that's the question around the LA city tax and the state tax, we should get to the bottom of that very quickly.
Okay. And when those things get clarified or resolved, then the state would put out information, as I assume the appropriate cities would as well, right?
Yes.
Right. Okay. Here's another question in from Valicia. I don't know if there's enough information here, but let me read it. If I have a partnership for manufacturing and distribution, and I'm also an equity participant, do I need to obtain a seller retailer's permit?
Yes.
Yes, right.
Anybody who's selling, even if you're selling at wholesale or manufacturing, and you need to have a seller's permit.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean you're going to owe taxes, but again, you're going to need to file a return every quarter. Yeah.
Yeah, it says, and then her second part was also the distributor is selling my product as a wholesale product. Same applies. Whether you have to have those seller permits to sell product, right?
That's right. And it's not just for cannabis, it's for anybody who's making wholesale.
Yeah. Great.
California.
Great. Let's try to squeeze a couple more in. We're running out of time, and we could probably, there's so much excitement about all these tax topics next.
Excitement.
Yeah, exactly. So I think this is an interesting one. Can I pay my taxes in cash?
Yes. So we typically don't accept cash for payment of taxes, but we recognize that certain business operators in the cannabis space particularly have trouble accessing banking services. So we will accept payment of, there's a waiver process. You ask for it, it's very easy to get. We'll accept payment in cash. contact your local Cdtfa office if you are going to need to pay in cash. We ask that people schedule the appointments 21 days in advance. We have very heavy security on days when we do cash acceptance, so we need time to make sure that everybody at our office and that the taxpayers are safe if they come to pay in cash.
Great, great. And then let's squeeze one more in here. Can I collect sales tax reimbursement and the cannabis excise tax from the customer?
Yes, so sales tax reimbursement you can collect from the customer, as I said during my presentation, almost every business does, and that's why we all pay sales tax when we go out and buy things. The excise tax has to be collected from the customer. Your customer has to pay that 15% excise tax.
Yeah, and maybe this last question will just kind of maybe reinforce some of the where people can get information resources. If I have a question or need assistance with California Cannabis Track and Trace system, or for that matter, any of the topics we discussed today, who should I contact?
Well, for any of the tax topics, contact Cdtfa. We'll be happy to help. Track and Trace is a system that is run by the Department of Cannabis Control now. It was previously run by the Department of Food and Agriculture, but that unit got merged in with DCC. So DCC is probably your best place to go for track and trace questions. If you have questions around track and trace as it interfaces with tax, we'd be happy to try to assist in any way we can. But for other track and trace questions, you're probably best off going to the Department of Cannabis Control.
Great. Well, Nick, we're out of time as always. We've always run out of time for a very important topic. Maybe one that not everyone has at the top of their mind, but clearly critical and important as people work on their business journeys and understand the good, the bad, and the details, right?
Yeah, no, it's very complicated, and I'm glad I was able to. I hope I was able to provide a little bit of insight, but I wish everybody the best of luck in their business journeys. And if there are questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. That's why we exist.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, I'd like to thank you and thank everyone for attending this informative webinar offered by the City of Los Angeles Department of Cannabis Regulation. Nick, thank you again for your generous support and participation. We value that and appreciate your involvement. This webinar recording will be found on DCR's website at cannabis.lacity.org. So for those that want to view it again for clarity and information, or for those that may have missed it, it will be available once it goes through the editing process. If you have any questions on accessing your account, please email dcr.sep@lacity.org. And thank you again for joining us. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll look forward to seeing everyone on the next webinar. Thank you very much.